Would you raise your right hand, please?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Could you please give us your name?
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Edward Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Assert my federal constitutional rights.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein?
It's here the saga of Jeffrey Epstein really began.
Die Epstein-Files sollen an die Öffentlichkeit. Über Monate hinweg hatte Donald Trump versucht, genau das zu verhindern.
The bill is passed.
This is the worst cover-up of my lifetime.
Das Justizministerium hat 30 Tage Zeit, diese Akten zu veröffentlichen.
Why don't they release that fucking list, huh?
I have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein.
What's going on?
On August 10th, 2019, one of the most connected men in America was found dead in a Manhattan jail cell.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein has in his own life.
Though most people in the U.S. had never heard of him, his name would soon go on to become one of the most notorious in modern history, right up there with the likes of Bernie Madoff, Al Capone, and Charles Manson. On paper, Jeffrey Epstein was a financier with ties to billionaires, royalty, scientists, and former presidents. But to those with knowledge of the secret world of human trafficking, pedophilia, and illicit sex crimes, he was the center of a very large and very illegal web. So, when he was found unresponsive while awaiting trial for a case that could blow the lid off global child sexual abuse, people were quick to develop theories. After all, his death effectively ended the possibility of a full public trial. There would be no courtroom testimony, no cross-examination, and no chance for him to speak under oath about what and who he knew. Call it human nature, but when a story stops too suddenly, speculation usually rushes in to fill the space. The Epstein didn't kill himself movement was one of the very first conspiracy theories to see mass adoption. It didn't help that it had long been suspected that he had dirt on hundreds of powerful men, or that the circumstances around his death were highly suspect. How had the security cameras near his cell reportedly malfunctioned? Why did the two guards assigned to monitor him first claim to have fallen asleep and later admit to falsifying records? Why had his cellmate been transferred shortly before his death? Little did anyone at the time know that asking these questions would lead the entire world down one of the darkest paths imaginable, while shining a light on the secret dealings of presidents, princes, and kings alike. Jeffrey Epstein was born in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, far from the world he would later inhabit. His neighborhood was the very picture of working class. His father maintained city parks, while his mother worked as a school aide. There were no mansions, no elite clubs, no private jets waiting to whisk him off to a private island. But young Jeffrey had one thing going for him. He was incredibly smart. At the public school he attended, he showed an early talent for mathematics. Numbers made sense to him. Right up until the day of his death, he possessed an incredible ability to recognize patterns and equations. But he was also restless. He tried to go to college, including New York University, but he never got a degree. This would have limited most people's options, but for Epstein, it was just another challenge. In his early 20s, he secured a teaching job at the Dalton School, one of Manhattan's most prestigious prep schools. It was an unusual appointment, given that he lacked the formal credentials most schools like Dalton require. To this day, nobody is entirely sure how he ended up teaching physics and calculus to the children of executives, investors, and power brokers, but it soon became clear why he was there. He wanted the proximity. When he, rather abruptly, left Dalton several years later, Epstein was able to use the connections he'd made while teaching to pivot into investment banking. He joined up with a little company called Bear Stearns, one of the largest public trading firms in the U.S. It was another bold move. Epstein had no finance degree, no MBA, and no formal training. But what he lacked in credentials, he apparently more than made up for in confidence, intelligence, and a growing understanding that influence often flows through relationships. Once at the firm, he worked in options trading, where he rose through the ranks very quickly. Colleagues described him as intense, analytical, and very interested in the mechanisms of power and access, and not just in terms of financial institutions. He was only in his late 20s, but he had set his sights on getting into the rooms where he could maximize his influence on the people who had the most to gain and the most to lose. In 1981, it's Epstein left Bear Stearns and started his own financial firm, Intercontinental Assets Group Incorporated. He claimed to specialize in managing money for extremely wealthy clients. In fact, according to his own descriptions, he worked only with billionaires. Everyone else was below his expertise. Given his high profile, high dollar, and highly private clientele, details about what he did with Intercontinental Assets Group are limited. Public records showed few confirmed clients. There were no large offices filled with analysts and no widely known investment funds tied to his name. Nevertheless, he managed to make an ample amount of money. One of his best documented relationships was with Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands, which once owned Victoria's Secret. Wexner granted Epstein significant authority over his finances. In fact, at one point, Epstein was actually given power of attorney, allowing him broad control over Wexner's assets. It was this relationship in particular that dramatically increased Epstein's wealth and status. Wexner was, in investment terms, a whale. It's theorized that Jeffrey could have only managed his finances and still lived the comfortable life of a multimillionaire. Instead, it was just the start. He acquired a massive townhouse in Manhattan, reportedly one of the largest private homes in the city, and began hobnobbing with the Big Apple's elite. Among his reported closest friends was Donald Trump, who, at the time, was a real estate mogul and whose relationship with Epstein would become a major point of contention several decades later. As the money continued to pour in, Jeffrey purchased real estate at a breakneck pace. By the early 90s, he owned properties in Palm Beach, New Mexico, Paris, and a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. He also purchased a private jet, which he used to shepherd himself and his famous friends to parties and properties around the world. All of this became part of his image as the financier to the world's elite. But years later, journalists and investigators would struggle to explain exactly how he built such wealth. There were few public examples of traditional investment success that matched his lifestyle. That mystery, however, simply became part of his image. Some would later claim that Epstein had reinvented himself yet again, this time as a gatekeeper. He wasn't just connecting powerful people to himself, he was connecting powerful people to their peers. To this day, how he did this and what sorts of results it produced remains buried under black bars and billions of dollars. By the time people started talking about the millennium, Jeffrey Epstein was one of the most influential people in the world, even if most ordinary people had no clue who he was. His Manhattan townhouse had become a gathering place where politicians, academics, entrepreneurs, and social figures attended dinners and meetings. He visited the White House, where he met Bill Clinton, another close associate who would frequently visit Epstein's properties. Seeking to present himself the way wealthy and influential men so often do, he became a patron of science and innovation, donating money to research institutions and forming relationships with well-known scientists like Stephen Hawking. He attended conferences on topics ranging from physics to artificial intelligence and became an early innovator in some of the most important pre- and post-2000s technologies. This expanded his network beyond those with wealth and power to those with knowledge, further reinforcing Epstein's network and his ability to leverage it. To politicians, he could offer introductions and potential donors. To academics, he offered funding and access to wealthy backers. To business leaders, he offered connections to other powerful players. But most important of all, he insulated himself. The more influential the people around him, the harder it became to question him without also questioning them. Association became protection, and this mattered because troubling allegations were starting to make their way around the country club circles. Some said he was an abuser, while others said he liked his women a little too young. Since he wasn't a public figure but was merely adjacent to them, few, if any, of these accusations made headlines. The power of Epstein's network seemed to outweigh the whispers, at least for a little while. In the mid-2000s, police in Palm Beach, Florida, began investigating allegations that Epstein had sexually abused underage girls. The accusations described a pattern in which young girls were allegedly paid to give massages, which sometimes led to sexual abuse. Court documents also alleged that some of these young girls were given money to recruit friends and co-workers to do the same. The case gained momentum, but it mostly stayed local. Due to Epstein's powerful connections, national news media were reluctant to start lobbing accusations around. The government was somewhat reluctant too, because in 2008, Epstein entered a controversial plea agreement with federal prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to state charges related to solicitation and procurement of a minor. In exchange, he would avoid federal prosecution. Many theorize that had this plea deal been avoided, Epstein would have been forced to open up the books on his dealings, potentially exposing powerful people who also took part in his trafficking operation. However, there is nothing indicating that the government had any idea of the scope and scale of the goings-on. Whatever led to the plea deal, Epstein's situation was quite cushy. He served 13 months in a county jail, during which he was granted work release privileges, allowing him to leave jail for extended hours during the day. Many legal experts argued it was unusually lenient given the seriousness of the allegations. Some went so far as to wonder whether or not there was something that the government wasn't telling them. For years, Epstein's 2008 sweetheart plea deal simmered beneath the surface of the news cycle. But that changed in 2018, when investigative journalists began examining the details of the agreement. Reports started to emerge describing how federal charges had been avoided. It was even suggested that Jeffrey may have been an asset of a foreign government, most likely Israel. By that time, the people who had let him go were mostly long gone. And to make matters worse, the current president just so happened to be a known Epstein associate, Donald Trump. How does a serious journalist approach a story with such vast legal and moral implications? Luckily, they didn't have to. In July 2019, federal prosecutors in New York arrested Epstein again, this time on sex trafficking charges. The highly detailed indictment described a horrifying pattern of alleged abuse dating back years, sometimes decades. And unlike in 2008, the accusations were far more detailed and even more serious. Suddenly, the case was everywhere, and so were photos of all the politicians, scientists, billionaires, and other high-profile friends Epstein had collected over the years. As more details went public, more people began asking questions. Who knew what? Who enabled him? Were others involved? Lawsuits and testimony suggested that Epstein had not operated entirely alone, forcing investigators to examine the roles of associates and employees, including some very important people. Amid the chaos of a shifting social climate, the American public began to get the sense that something larger was unfolding. There had always been a latent belief that elites were up to something they didn't want the rest of us knowing about. Could Epstein's wealth have come, at least partly, from satisfying the illegal urges of his famous friends? The media, the left, and the right couldn't wait to find out the answer. Then, it all just stopped. On July 23, 2019, Epstein was found injured in his jail cell in what authorities described as a possible attempt on his own life. As a result, he was placed on suicide watch. However, after a few days, he appeared to be getting better, so the extra supervision was removed. Then came August 10th. Epstein was found unresponsive and was eventually declared dead by paramedics. The medical examiner ruled his death a suicide by hanging. It made sense. He'd tried it only weeks before, and he was facing a life behind bars as a convicted pedophile. But it was only a matter of hours before people began claiming that there was no way Epstein had done the job himself. Celebrity medical examiners began claiming that the real cause of death was strangulation. Add in the malfunctioning cameras and guards falsifying reports, and you have a powerful reputation for an enduring conspiracy that has yet to abate. The overarching theory was a simple one. Epstein's elite friends had him killed before he could air their dirty laundry. For perhaps the first time in history, people from all corners of the political spectrum agreed that the official story was officially BS, even if they had different ideas about who could have actually been behind it. The Clintons, the Trumps, Mossad, aliens. The courts didn't seem interested in investigating, so the internet did it instead. Almost overnight, sleuths began to turn up photos, emails, and other flight records. They began calling his plane the Lolita Express and accused anyone who had ever been on it of illegal activity. But of all things, it was Epstein's private island in the Caribbean that most captured the public imagination. Not only was it a clear sign of his immense wealth and influence, but it was also remote, surrounded by blue water, and accessible only by boat or plane. To many observers, it seemed like the perfect setting for secret illegal activities. But the strangest thing of all, this time, the internet kooks seemed to be right. After Epstein's death, the story didn't go away. If anything, it metastasized. Civil lawsuits appeared, accomplices were tried and convicted, allowing court documents to be unsealed in waves. Millions of documents, what became known as the Epstein files, began to trickle out to the public. Having your name in these documents, whether it was tied to wrongdoing or not, has become an international black mark. Since 2025, dozens of rich and powerful people have had to publicly explain the nature of their relationship to the most notorious sex trafficker and pedophile in history. Some have had to resign from their jobs or scale back their public persona. For some observers, this feels like the beginning of elite accountability. For others, it seems like confirmation that powerful systems protect themselves. Whatever the case, these documents have ignited intense global conversations about influence, transparency, and immunity. The perception that certain people are untouchable has weakened, as has the public's desire to stand by and watch as the rich and powerful flaunt the law. Whether the global elite is actually collapsing remains an open question. We still seem to be a very long way off from anything you might call accountability. Still, those who did participate in these illegal activities are biting their nails at each new batch of documents being released. Maybe that in itself is a victory, small as it may be. At its core, Jeffrey Epstein's story is not just about crime. It is about power without transparency. He used his smarts and charm to move smoothly between worlds that rarely overlap for ordinary people. Finance, academia, politics, celebrity culture, philanthropy. In each space, he adopted the language of the room so well that he eventually became the most important person in it, even though he lacked the credentials that many elites rely on. Whether it was money, young girls, or just a good party in a beautiful location, Epstein made sure he had what the people around him wanted, and they gave him endless access in return. Regardless of whether one accepts the official ruling of suicide, Epstein's death cannot be mentioned without bringing up a troubling question. How accountable are the most powerful people in society? And if we can't honestly say they should be held to the same standards as the rest of us, then do we really have a society at all?